We're really excited to have John Staubitz today, who's the Director of Behavior Analysis and Education at Triad, which is Vanderbilt's Autism Institute. Thank you for joining us here today, John.
Thanks so much to both of you for having me. This is a treat.
So tell us a little bit about your story. We want to start there and how you got started and how you ended up in the field that you're in.
Absolutely. So the story starts way back as a middle schooler. I got involved doing volunteering. There's a summer camp in Cincinnati where I grew up for kids with disabilities. It's where they'd go to have just a typical summer camp experience. And so I was hooked from the get-go, and that was kind of my summertime passion thing that I did. And by the time I was looking for colleges, I thought I really wanted to be a special education teacher. I thought, where's a career where I can spend time interacting with some of these folks who think differently or learn differently or behave differently and make a difference, hopefully. So that's where it all started.
To see the heart posture of a 17-year-old at the time that volunteers at that camp, I have unbelievable respect for those that dedicate their lives to serving those with special needs. I mean, that takes a level of service that few people have that capacity. So it's amazing in your adulthood that you have that. But to see that in a 17-year-old, how did you find yourself at that camp? Was it something that you were looking for a job? Did a family member, was there a religious influence? What was the onset to say, all right, this is something that I'd love to do?
I mean, I think a lot of young people, they want to find something that they're good at, that they enjoy. And I'd always been looking for something, and I always felt like, I'm not a great athlete. I like running, but I'm not that good. Or I want to be a musician, but I'm not that good. This is something where I felt like it kind of clicked. I felt like I had a bit of a knack for it, and it made me feel good about myself and became kind of part of my identity at that point.
Was that knack like patience? Was it connection? What clicked for you at the camp to make you feel like, hey, I'm actually really good at this? It's something that really fills my tank.
I mean, I think you'd have some sorts of breakthrough things. I think it's like, I mean, even as a teen, like certain things would happen that you'd realize this is an accomplishment. So like I remember there was this guy, JJ, who I worked with after a couple years there. He was a guy who was in state custody. And this van of teens would show up, and they had really, really, I think, intensive needs, but also difficult lives to go along with it. I remember when I first met JJ, and I mean, I was like 16 or 17. He was towering over me. He had a good 6 to 8 inches on me, and wasn't speaking. And the second I first saw him, he was punching himself in the head really hard and biting his arms.
Wow.
And it was scary. And I was kind of like, whoa, it was really intimidating because I mean, that's a thing with some people with self-injury is a big, big issue with a lot of folks with intellectual and developmental disabilities. And I was like, wow, this is the big leagues. And I remember I really bonded with him. We spent a lot of time together. He was one, actually, when I was talking about the swimming thing, he was one where I made it my mission that he could just sit on the deck if he wanted to, but without coercing him. I remember just seeing, can I get him comfortable enough? Can I coax him to come in with me? And that just, I don't know, there's probably a photo somewhere, but eventually I was able to get him to get into about waist deep water in the pool, and it was scorching hot summer. It probably felt good, but that's the kind of thing that really clicked for me. Wow, if I hadn't been here, and if I hadn't been patient enough, or taken the time to build the relationship, he wouldn't have necessarily had that experience. And so I think that's kind of at the root of what I was getting out of it at that point.
So at that time, to kind of back up in the landscape of studying this over the years, would you say at that time was a lot of the conversation, the dialogue, the efforts more just around caregiving essentially versus research? Because it seems like in your journey, it sounds like we're going to make a little bit of a shift there. So can you talk about that and what the landscape was like at the time?
Yeah, I think, again, I was kind of getting into special education because I wanted to serve and I wanted to have those interactions and that enrichment. But I think I realized, well, if it's going to be special education, then it's going to be about building skills and skills that are educationally relevant. So I think this truly was my first entree into what is it like being in a classroom. And what is it like if the main thing we're doing together isn't swimming or playing ball, but it's, trying to learn basic academic skills and so on. So, I think that was a very formative experience. I learned a lot through that.
What was the connection into Vanderbilt? So what ultimately brought you in here to Nashville?
Yeah, so one of the things I was really fortunate to have at Ohio State was a chance to do an undergraduate thesis. So I got to do reading research in a Columbus Public School, and my advisor, Gwendolyn Cartledge, as I was nearing graduation, she said, well, you can stay here and do your master's with me, and I'd love to have you. But there's this guy at Vanderbilt who is really, really interested in that intersection of reading intervention and academic intervention and behavior, especially for kids with emotional and behavior disorders, because that had kind of become a real interest of mine. Based on those experiences you're just talking about. And so she said, you should talk to Joe Webby. And he's still department chair here at Vanderbilt Special Ed program. But I basically, in 2003, like not knowing anything about Nashville, came down here and met him and took the tour and was able to get a research fellowship that paid my way. And yeah, that was, I moved down to Nashville in 2004 to be a full-time professional grad student.
Hopefully you bought some real estate pretty quick after that.
I wish I had. I mean, I'm thankful to be a landowner, but oh man, if I had in 2004.
Right, we all say that.
I know, even if it had been like the square that my savings
like,
probably
I'll take my happy little square.
Yeah. Another part of that decision was at that point I had felt like if I'm going to be working with kids with behavior issues, then I really wanted specialized training. And so I'd learned about this thing called applied behavior analysis, which in a nutshell, it's using behavioral psychology like B.F. Skinner stuff to really understand learning, understanding how principles of reinforcement work. A lot of it probably would map really well into business. And people understanding organizational behavior stuff. It's the same sorts of principles, but it's like, well, what if you approached learning problems or behavior problems from a similar mindset? And so at that time, Vanderbilt was about the only place I knew of where I could get kind of a dual master's in special education and behavior analysis. And that was another draw along with Joe. So. Yeah.
It seems like the theme of autism started early for you and has maintained throughout the entirety of your career.
Yep.
Was that ever something that you thought about making a pivot? Because special ed and the education, I imagine, is covering a lot of different needs.
Yeah.
So what was the sustained drive for autism? I mean, is someone in your family autistic, in your community? What was that reason?
I mean, honestly, I think that throughout a lot of the early parts of my career, like I was continuing to work with folks who are autistic and enjoying that. I think that, the space I was really trying to work in with students with emotional or behavior disorders, but there's actually a substantial percentage of that population that is in fact autistic. Mm-hmm. And there were, as I think back, every classroom that I've ever taught in, there was at least a couple students who had autism diagnosed or undiagnosed. So I think it's almost, I think at this point, I think that autism is around us to such a high degree that it's kind of everywhere. I mean, I've since learned that I have family members who are autistic. I have learned that there's more, there's a lot more of it, but I was blind to a lot of that. I mean, honestly, like a lot of folks, up until even just a few years ago, my concept of autism is pretty narrow. Yeah. I was focusing more on the kinds of people I might have met in a special ed classroom or a treatment center, but there's a lot of folks who have probably been our bosses and our teachers and our healthcare providers or attorneys who are autistic. We may not have even known it.
Yeah. I can almost hear the problem solver analytical in you that basically diagnosed this as a place of maximum impact from just a statistical prevalence perspective. Sure. And it's almost like that could have been what pulled you towards it of like, I can really have an impact here. Yeah. I mean, I think that's a wonderful way of framing it. And yeah, I believe that the classroom, because I taught for almost 6 years, and I was really drawn towards students and programs where there'd be a low baseline, people who are really struggling, kids who are really on the margins, and just realizing, I mean, it's not just about the low expectations we set, but almost anything you do to help is going to be a benefit, but just kind of also I found it to be energizing to take on those sorts of challenges and see, well, how far can we get with the time we have together? I want to shift. I want to come back and really deep dive kind of where we are in autism research in a minute. But before we do that, let's talk about that move to Nashville. Yep. And so, are you at a stage now, like, is Nashville home for you? Do you see this as where you guys will stay? Yeah, I mean, I've lived here for, I think, 18 of the last 20 years. This is home for me. After grad school, I taught in Nashville, and then I took a hiatus and lived in Southern California for a couple years, teaching and consulting. And I missed Nashville. I missed Tennessee. I mean, not just because it was closer to family, but I really liked the community here. I loved this city in particular.
And so, yeah, I picked this over Santa Monica.
What drove that? Like, you've been Midwest, Nashville's like, screw it, I'm going to Southern California. What was that?
It's a bit of a trope, maybe. I'd always pictured I'd go off somewhere. Like, my brother had gone to New York City. I was like, I'll have a big city adventure.
Yeah.
So there was a woman I was pretty seriously dating, like coming out of grad school, and she said, well, I'm going to go out to UCLA and get my PhD. And we weren't like serious enough to like move in together, but I was like, well, I'll go out there too. I'm sure I can find a job, and I don't need to stay in Nashville. So it kind of was just saying, let's see where life takes me. And so, yeah, that was there were lots of jobs available out there. The kind of jobs that were available were not the level of what are here. I didn't like the work as much. I worked a couple different jobs out there, but it was fun being in, the weather was nice. The outdoor stuff was nice.
And the level being different, meaning that they weren't as good in California as they were here? Like, was there something special about Tennessee versus California?
It's so funny. Like, I think the services were by and large better. I think
in California or
in California.
Okay.
Yeah. And I think a lot of that, honestly, I think that's a theme I'd love to make sure that listeners are getting. I think that what we have not that we should be on a path towards California. I think some of the biggest strengths were, though, there was a lot of a lot of awareness for the public. The consumers were very savvy out there. It was a very powerful advocacy community, and I think that meant that education and treatment was head and shoulders above. I mean, insurance companies weren't messing around with people. If kids were entitled to an education, schools wouldn't say, well, let's see if we can get by on not giving what they need, and maybe they won't know the difference. Like, they kind of assumed I worked with students out there who were homeless, and schools did not mess with them. They knew we got to follow the letter of the law.
So for me, one of the traditions that we've got is we have every guest bring something unique. So what did you bring today? Tell us a story, and then we'll get back into talking about what you do.
Perfect. Yeah. So I guess I was kind of on the track of, well, what have I done here in Tennessee? I brought in, this is a photograph of the students. It was right around this time of year, actually. So my first year teaching ever was here in Nashville, Metro Nashville Public Schools. And if you look at that, it's not quite a candid. It's like a posed shot, but those kids, no one's acting. Like, that's literally kind of a snapshot of like what that class was like. And I was laughing with Danielle a second ago. I mean, these young people, they're all grown up now. Like, every once in a while I'll run into one in the community, and they're adults now. And it's great to know that. But like this sits in my office. And I think having images like that for me are important. It's kind of a reminder as I have moved into positions of doing more research or more leadership or stuff like that. I spend less time with the kids, and I miss that a bit, but also I want to stay rooted to it, because that's why I'm here.
That's hard. You're having the impact, but you do miss some of that real tangible feeling. Yeah,
and like they're the ones that matter. I mean, I wouldn't, anything I do would have zero impact if there weren't young people to grow and change.
Something I have noticed, I've got a dear friend of mine that has a granddaughter that has a number of different special needs, but what he consistently comments is, he said, I've never seen a more pure experience of joy than amongst my granddaughter. And that has just touched my heart in a way that photo perfectly captures, right? Is we are societally, culturally trained for, what is this going to make me look like? What are people going to think of me?
Yeah.
And I don't want to be too broad, but that layer seems to not exist nearly as much or to the same degree in a lot, certainly that photo. So maybe this next portion, what I'd love to do is spend a handful of minutes that, if we can set aside the no stupid questions rule, and just get to ask you some things that the whole idea of special needs, special education can bring a heaviness to someone that doesn't have that in my immediate family, that I'm curious and I have questions and I want to know how to serve, but sometimes I'm afraid to ask questions because I don't want to offend, I don't want to cause a awkward dynamic. So if we could just maybe spend 10 or 15 minutes to serve our listeners to just let us ask a couple questions.
Absolutely.
And maybe it'll help Annalee and I gain some sea legs in the conversation, but our listeners too.
Sure.
I'll start off with just saying, when you see autism portrayed in television and in movies, just over the last decade, like I think of Modern Family, I think of The Good Doctor, there are perceptions where I think for the first time America is seeing autism very visual, and a lot of times it has this dynamic of incredibly intelligent, but also like genius level intelligent, but also severe social struggles in society or in their family. So can you just talk about the portrayal of autism in media and whether you think the last decade has been helpful in those portrayals, or whether you think it's reinforcing stereotypes that you're like, I'm not sure that that's being represented how I'd love to see it represented?
These are, I love the themes you're bringing up here. And I honestly, I'm encouraged by there being more visibility for it in media. I mean, as far as I may not, I can only speak for myself, but I do think that to the extent, like right now, like if you guys are able to mention, you could probably, if pushed, could mention probably 3 to 5 different, shows or movies where you'd say there's this autistic character, there's that one. I think that's part of maybe the solution of moving towards people recognizing there's different. I mean, years ago they called it autism spectrum disorder. The idea being there's all different presentations. And I remember for a while, folks in the autism community saying, like, please just stop having met one person with autism, assuming that that's what it looks like.
Yeah.
And you meet someone and you say, I don't think that person's autistic. They don't look like the other autistic person I met.
Yeah.
And like that's really like a major misunderstanding. I mean, there's like any characteristic shared by many people, it's going to look and feel different. So I think it's a big part of it. I think that there's, you hit on, I think, a couple of the core features of autism have always been, on the one hand, some issues around social and communication differences, that it's been a difference experience, and that can range from people feeling like it's debilitating or a barrier to people maybe saying, well, I'm perfectly happy to have a very different set of social needs or skills. I think on the other side, it's looking at what they'll call kind of like restricted interests or repetitive patterns of behavior, but some sort of in a way that's maybe different from a neurotypical person, an interest in doing things the same way, having things the same way, and almost in some cases being maybe more bothered or more agitated when there's a deviation from that. But I think that those hold true across the different presentations, and I hope that's coming through in media. It sounds like maybe it is.
Does the traditional presentation of autism always include some part of exceptional ability to, I don't want to say offset, but to counteract in some way? Does it always include that? Or help me understand what that, because I feel like that's the consistent portrayal, is that it is largely
Rain Man,
portrayed.
savant type.
Mathematical genius, an analytical genius, and I sometimes just wonder, is that lurking there, in every case? So help me understand that.
I mean, that's a phenomenal question, and my thought would be at this point, I've met hundreds of autistic people, all different ages. I've never met one who didn't have things they could do that I certainly couldn't do, or most people couldn't do.
Yeah.
So I think in terms of sometimes it might be something that's easier or harder to recognize or measure or figure out. I mean, in some cases it's been stuff that's very obvious.
Yeah.
But years ago, meeting someone who you'd meet, and this person would say, well, what's your birthday? And they'd say, you were born on Tuesday. And they'd be right, which like you can look on the internet, like mathematicians have said that's a many step process. Like they've tried to write out how do you get there, and it's like at least 15 to 26 steps or something like that.
Wow.
Yeah.
But there's like, that's a thing. There's several autistic people who do that. We're not quite sure how they do that. But like I remember, this was like one of the summer jobs I had. There was a guy who carried a keyboard with him everywhere, and this guy he couldn't speak vocally. I mean, definitely had other sorts of deficits. But this guy, this is like kind of like a Rain Man sort of thing. But this is my first experience of just shocking ability. He carried this keyboard, and he'd be playing music all the time. And I knew enough about music to know he'd play in this key, and then he'd immediately switch to another key, and then switch to another key. And it'd be songs you knew, and then he'd be playing harmonies on. I mean, he was just doing all this stuff that he was like a 9 or 10-year-old kid, and he just had the most incredible, his timing was perfect. He had all of these capabilities that as someone who studied music, some people never get there. And he was a self-taught, musician who just spent all of his time just doing. So all that to say, I believe, I think on one level, everybody
Yeah.
has special abilities. I do think there's a lot about, the more I understand about autism through family members and friends and people I'm meeting, I think that a lot of folks will say, let's stop calling it a disability. Let's stop calling it a disorder. I've heard people say they feel like difference makes more sense.
Yeah.
As in there's different preferences, there's different strengths. And I think that this is what you're onto here.
Yeah, so I so love that. And I think one of the questions I have, so I'm really curious of where we are research-wise, where we are with understanding, of the autism spectrum. Again, I'm the same way that I've always seen it as, wow, incredible gifts that can manifest in these different places. And I think one of the things that's interesting to me about your field in particular with education is to say there was a time when, the philosophy seemed like more of a, they have all these problems, we're going to put them off to the side, versus it seems like you're really working at changing and creating a culture of let's basically develop these unique gifts and make sure that we're providing an educational experience that highlights and provides a custom piece for them. But can you talk about how far into that are we? Are we still way off base from where we need to be in terms of education to be able to develop those things versus just we don't understand it, so we're not going to do anything with it?
I think that's awesome, and it's. I truly think that's where we're headed. I think culturally, I think that's where we're headed educationally. I consider my wife works a lot with a lot of graduate students who come from other countries. She has a lot of graduate students from China, for instance, and I feel like part of the idea of American education not leading to all. I think a lot of her students will say that themes in some of their countries are about everybody kind of having the same skill sets or kind of a normalization goal, and I don't think that's ever been the goal for us as a culture or with an education. I love the idea of, if someone is, particularly gifted at and interested in computer programming, that they might enjoy that more, for instance, than debate team, and that we don't say, well, you need to be equally proficient in both, that they can, if you will become a star in that thing if you really develop it and lean into it. And that's what, it's what I want for our country. It's also just as a parent now of young children, it's what I want for my daughters is I'm not interested in whether they're just like everybody else. What I'm interested in is them, as you're saying, finding joy, finding it in their way, and then also cultivating the.
Yep. Okay, so this might be a slightly controversial question, but I'm curious. So as a parent as well, right, I think about this all the time too. And one of the things I've seen socially current day, and I'm really intrigued by this, is I'm like you. I think that spectrum is so wide, and it's like you start meeting people and experiencing family members and things and going, okay, I maybe never noticed this, but this can definitely be somewhere on that spectrum. It might be a wider spectrum than we all realize, and we, who knows kind of where we all fall on that. But my question is, it can feel today like from a parent perspective, right? As a parent, we all know that significance, it can bring things out in parents of, your own identity and that significance in parents. And one of the things I've seen and kind of heard as a trend lately is this almost this woke parent ideology of beating my chest. It's a significance thing that my child has a disorder, and it becomes less about the child and more about that kind of, being part of the club. And have you seen that? This is something I'm curious about that I think could actually be almost damaging, but I'm curious about if you've seen any prevalence of that in the education space.
No, I guess I'm not. Maybe it's not in some of the circles where I'm interacting, but a lot of the families that I'm encountering are ones who are especially because I don't work with just anybody with autism. A lot of the themes that are the people I'm working with are people really struggling with behavior. Yeah. And a lot of these families are just desperate for any kind of help or relief. So I guess maybe that's what I'm picking up on.
Yeah. And do you see when you're dealing with those behavioral disorders, is it something where you see kind of parents or even teachers or educators pushing kids to a certain path just to explain it versus really being open to exploring a range of for that particular kid what's going on and how to navigate them through that? Or do you see any of those kind of problems, I guess, and being able to develop these custom solutions?
I mean, I'm sure there's some of that out there. I mean, I do think we do a lot of consulting and statewide. And a lot of times I'm looking out for, do we have reasonable expectations? Are we trying to fit a square peg into a round hole? And sometimes that's, not that it's up to me to tell people change your expectations or something, but I do try to, as a behavior analyst, I'm lucky to be able to figure out ways for us to measure things and kind of report, this is what the numbers say, we're on a trajectory towards being able to read, or we're on a trajectory towards being able to learn this skill. So I mean, I think sometimes that can help if there's differences of opinion. It's like, let's look at something. I mean, emotions are important and emotions are real, but sometimes there's other things that help too. Yeah. But I mean, I think that for a lot of the students that I'm working with, like the biggest struggle is us figuring out how to, students they have a right to a free and appropriate public education. A lot of the kids I'm working with, their behavior can be so dangerous or so impactful it's like, yes, this is their right, but how can we make sure that they're safe enough that we can do this?
Yeah.
I mean, how do we make sure that they're not going to get hurt? How do we make sure that people working with them don't get hurt? And so I think that's where, I mean, again, it's usually working closely with families, educators, administrators to try to. That can be a real challenge.
Yeah, because I would have to think that the science piece of it, because it is emotional, I can't imagine as a parent navigating through that, and you're trying to find solutions for your child, and you don't always know exactly what's going on and what the best path is. But when you think about the science of it, what are some of the things that y'all are? Is it literacy rates? Like, what are you measuring to basically be able to keep it on that channel of how we're developing these children?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think for our, I think there's a couple big things that our team is working on, and I think one of those is trying to really increase engagement.
Okay.
So, I mean, the children, they have to be there.
Yeah.
They have to be kind of in a learning place. So that's things like, our kids, are they showing up? Have they been fed enough? Yeah. Are they in an emotional headspace where the home they came out of wasn't too chaotic for them to show up and learn? So I think that those are some of the big parts of it. Then also, I love that you brought up the joy that we sometimes see. I think that for a lot of kids I work with, it's been harder for them to find joy, or maybe like they can find joy at home, but the question is, what does a happy version of them look like in school? And I honestly think that, especially for the populations I work with, but maybe in general, we should be looking for how can we help kids to be more there's a phrase right now that we use a lot in our work professionally: happy, relaxed, and engaged. But wouldn't anybody want their child to be happy, relaxed, and engaged at school?
Yeah.
And wouldn't we all agree that if your child couldn't reach a state of being happy, relaxed, and engaged, they're not going to learn anything? Yeah. So I think that's, I don't know, maybe I'm taking us off track here a little bit, but I feel like, there's a lot of great science out there around, the way to teach someone reading. And honestly, some of the work early in my career was looking at that. And I think at this point, there's great data out there. There are great tools out there. People choose to use them or not. But I think that for kids where the motivation's been the issue, I think sometimes we have to get them happy enough to learn too.
Yeah.
A lot of times when someone that doesn't have experience with any type of special education, the natural reaction is fear.
Sure.
And when you see certain behavioral presentations of autism or otherwise, it can enhance that fear.
Yeah.
So from someone that has been around children all the way through adults, you've done it for decades, how might you counsel someone that is more of an outsider, that might see something and their first reaction be fear? What would you say to them?
Oh man, I think there's a few. I think there's maybe a few approaches. I think one is, having an awareness of what one's feeling is really important. So if you're saying I'm feeling fear, okay, well, someone can think through what am I afraid of here, or is that and can I look at that closely? Yeah. Do I think I'm going to get hurt? Am I worried I'm going to hurt their feelings? Am I worried I'm going to offend their family members? So if we can kind of think through, what do I need to do to maybe make that fear seem a little bit less clear, or more clear, but more surmountable. I think other things, I think perspective taking. I feel like the more I've worked around some of these populations, the easier it comes to me. I'm not saying I'm right, but I'll think and I will verbalize for people around me, what I think it might feel like for the person who's in this space. So for instance, let's say if you were at the dentist's office,
Okay.
and if someone brought in a child maybe with a developmental disability, and if the child is, obviously very agitated and upset, if you're to think through, some kids love medical appointments, some don't.
Yeah.
But imagine showing up, and what if you had only 5% of the information your parent gave you when you came? Because the parent tried to explain it, but for this child, their receptive language might make it really hard to figure out. Or picture if when you're in the dentist's office, if you know that you can say, "Oh, I need a break," like I'm getting a bit woozy or whatever, that they'll hear you. But picture if you didn't have that luxury. Picture if you're not confident, if someone starts putting stuff in your mouth, you may not be able to get them to stop without hitting them, because they're not going to understand you. They're not going to respond. They might think you're just being difficult. So some of the kids I work with, like trying to think that perspective, I think allows me to be a little more, like interpreting what's this really about? Like they may not be they might be showing anxiety or the fear of their own. And I think a third one is, I think that realizing the impact of our fear when we're holding ourselves at a distance, I think we can it can be harder for us to draw out the best in people. And I think that, a lot of the kids I work with, even though I think for a while there was this stereotype going around autism and people saying, oh, they don't like people, they don't like friends, they're not social. I believe that's a myth. I believe that it may look different. It may look different what they want from us. It may look different how they ask for it. But I find more and more, a lot of folks, the idea is to approach if you want to, be available. I mean, maybe don't try to guide the interaction. Like, you might think that, like you might think other kids want you to go up and joke with them or touch them. Like, just make yourself available and kind of see where they lead you. Like, if you can signal through your body language or through your words, hey, I'm here, and if you want, we can talk, or I can just watch you doing what you're doing and see where they take you.
Maybe just two more questions before we transition on.
Sure.
Do you find that for one individual that's presenting with pretty severe autism, that there is any enhanced or special connection to someone else that has autism, that they have an ability, even if it's not to relate in the same social way that you and I might relate? Does that community add anything? Or do you find that, hey, it's really no different if this individual is around someone that is autistic or not?
Well, that's a great question. And it's hard for me to know so much around folks who have difficulty maybe vocally or verbally expressing these sorts of things. But I think what I'm hearing a lot from autistic individuals who can speak to it is that I do think that, and family members of mine have talked to me about this, like it can feel like they can feel more understood sometimes, like, feeling understood about misunderstandings that they tend to experience, or there may be, more of an acceptance of differences, like, oh, you have this, superpower, I have this one, like we can recognize that and celebrate that for each other, or, having a restricted interest of one kind, if we're both really into the same hobby, then it might be that, maybe your neurotypical friends would say, all right, like we played that last weekend, let's do something else. And these other folks say, no, this is what we do every weekend. We get together and we do the thing. That is our obsession, and it might be for years.
And the last thing is there's a lot of conversation about the prevalence of autism. And I feel like with every 5 years or 10 years, there's a finger pointed at what is causing a significant rise in autism. What's really unique for you in particular is you have lived through a series of decades where autism was not understood hardly at all in the 90s when you got started. And really negative, pejorative language was used for something that none of us had a concept, to where today the understanding has expanded dramatically. So as a researcher in this space, can you help affirm or debunk whether we're seeing autism rise at all? Is it just a product of more diagnosis and better? Or is it truly like there is an underlying thing that is resulting in measurably higher cases of autism than before?
My hypothesis for a while, and it's hard to prove or disprove something like this, but I believe that it's really hard to rule out detection differences, because there was, if you compare to where we were, there are many more diagnostic tools than before. There are so many more diagnosticians. in a place like Tennessee, for instance, we have, I think we are second in the country behind California in terms of early autism detection. That doesn't necessarily mean we have more autism. It's because of Vanderbilt Medical Center and my colleagues there.
Wow.
The infrastructure they've built. I mean, like my colleagues provide many trainings a year for school psychologists across the state, specifically training them how to do the ADOS, which is the gold standard assessment. Not every state has someone who can do that, and our Tennessee Department of Education pays for that.
Wow.
My colleagues developed an app that was designed to walk a pediatrician through a screening. So let's say a parent says, I'm kind of concerned with my child. Should we try to get an evaluation or not? This is assuming that those frontline pediatricians can play a huge role in either telling a parent, give it some time, which was what they were always telling parents in the 90s. They'll grow out of it. And then years later, some parents said, I wish we'd started early.
Yeah.
Or, kind of saying, no, they're not checking out so far. And so I think there could be other factors, but I think it's really hard, I think, to rule that out. I mean, there has just, I think, been an exponential growth in access to diagnostics.
Okay.
And that's, I think that's a good thing.
How much of initiative is there at Triad around like parental education too? Because I would have to think that is such an important part, and especially again, coming out of an era where not much was known, it would be such an important part of helping parents understand that, like, hey, your kid can go on to do all of these different things, but there's ways that you support them in that development. So how much effort do you guys put into that?
I mean, if I'm allowed to make a few plugs.
Sure.
I mean, a couple. I'm Triad is within the Vanderbilt Kennedy Center, and I think the Vanderbilt Kennedy Center has a long history of trying to engage with families. My colleagues at Triad for years have led a program called Families First.
Okay.
That's not limited to only people in Nashville. People join virtually from all across the state of Tennessee. I think there's even people from some other states who join. But I think it's once or twice a month. They have trainings for parents. Some of those parents just found out that they have an autistic child. Others, are kind of telling other people what they've learned over the years. But I think that programs like that, I think, can be really helpful. I think that there's a lot of organizations in Tennessee, STEP or the Disability Rights Tennessee, the ARC of Tennessee, all of whom, know that there's families out there who, like them, are only as powerful as the knowledge they have. So trying to share that. I think part of my plug is, I think what Tennesseans should know is that our Department of Education has an initiative called the Tennessee Technical Assistance Network. And this is, 90% of the work I do is on this network, but it's basically at no cost to families or their schools. It's kind of a hub for people to get the assistance they need. And so if someone Googles TENTAN or TNTAN, a parent could say, I need assistance, I need help with my kids, and they would be immediately routed to a free service where an individual will hear them out and try to help them find what they need. So I think it's huge. I don't know if Tennessee's better than everybody else, but I think there's definitely some cool initiatives and some really positive partners in our state.
Yeah.
And maybe we'll use that as a jumping in place for the final part of the conversation, which is just to really bring it home to Tennessee.
Yeah.
So you said just a couple minutes ago that California was number one and Tennessee number two.
Yeah.
I can't think of many lists of anything where California and Tennessee are right there together on something. I mean, really different states. So let's talk about a couple Tennessee-specific things as it relates to this initiative. So first, just from a numbers perspective, can you help me understand in Tennessee how many cases of autism we might see in a state like this? Do you have that data to help me think about just what type of incident rate we see amongst children?
I should have memorized. I think it's 1 in 35. Okay. I will fact check myself and make sure to let you know. But yeah, it's probably pretty accurate. We I think in part because of our infrastructure, we have been one of the CDC's detection sites. When you hear those national numbers, Tennessee is contributing to those. There's a CDC center at Emory University in Atlanta that kind of is a hub for a lot of that kind of stuff. But yeah, I mean, I think that is a big part of it. I was in a meeting with some folks. Commissioner Brad Turner, who works under the governor, is over the Department of Intellectual and Developmental Division of Intellectual and Developmental Disabilities, or DIDD. And yeah, within this conversation, they were talking about being at some national conferences, and people saying, wow, just as you said, Tennessee's number 2 on this list. I mean, this is a big deal. And people were coming to the commissioner and his colleagues saying, what are y'all doing?
Yeah, someone cares in order to make it there.
Yeah.
Like,
it's
someone
a big
cares.
Deal.
Yeah.
And to be, I mean, honestly, for any state to be a leader like that is a big deal. But I think that's a really positive mark for our state, I think, in terms of the possibility of sizing up need. I think along with that, I think another really groundbreaking program we have is, I think that, to me, telling people that your child is autistic, that's helpful information maybe, but like, what do you do with it?
Yeah.
There's a program at Tennessee's Early Intervention System. And again, this is funded by the governor's office. I think it's under DIDD, but where families in Tennessee, if your child is 2 or 3 and you get that diagnosis, you are immediately eligible to enroll in this TEIS system that can take you all the way up through pre-K or kindergarten. And it includes robust things like, my colleagues, for instance, work on this program. You could be in any corner of the state, and an early interventionist will come out to your home, and as a parent will show you some basic, and they customize it. If what your child needs is communication skills, they'll teach you how to enhance your child's communication. If your child's struggling to learn how to play, it could be play, it could be behavior, like if it's feeding, toileting, and those sorts of things. And then my colleagues will provide consultation to those early interventionists, so they're really getting kind of state-of-the-art service. But again, I think that's rare. When I hear the other states hear about what Tennessee's doing, they're like, wow, that is an ideal model. You can't get any better than making it really easy for people to get the diagnosis and then not walk away empty-handed, but walk away with a connection to quality care.
That's incredible.
Get things off and running.
And I just can't imagine as a parent
Yeah.
getting that type of support. No matter where, that's probably one of the coolest things I've heard.
Which to me,
doing.
I'm sure some would even appreciate if it's like, well, here's a pamphlet or here's a website.
Sure, but it's not
for
the
someone to get to
same.
know you and your child, I mean, just because
Yeah.
kids are so different.
Yeah.
I think that's a really important one. So I think those are really positive. I think too, again, this kind of in the Department of Education space, a lot of the work I do is partnered with the Tennessee Department of Education, and I've been really impressed and pleased with how progressive they've been. They I think it was in 2020 that they put together the grant applications for this Tennessee Technical Assistance Network. And I'm not really aware of other states that are doing it. I have colleagues in a lot of other states, but where they've looked across 7 or 8 different areas of disability support in schools and made sure we work together efficiently. We got to talk to each other. We have to be coordinated. So there's the family engagement part. There's the severe behavior part. There's a part that's just focused on autism that my colleagues at Triad run. There's a part on transition from school to adulthood. It's been cool to see how that's come together, and I'm really glad Tennessee's doing that.
I'm curious about that too across Tennessee. I mean, 2 questions. One, how consistent is the programming, like county to county, across Tennessee? We've to some extent figured out paths that work. How consistently is that rolled out across the state? So that's the first question.
I mean, it's so localized, because I really strongly feel like from school system to school system, there's not only different resources, but very different student populations.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that, for instance, around behavior, I think that there's a little more possibility than before. Behavior analysts like myself, when I came to Triad 10 years ago, they're really rare. Like, I remember seeing some research, and there were many, many counties in Tennessee where no behavior analyst reported serving that county.
Yeah.
Like, you might be 100 miles from someone who could help if your kid had severe behavior. But there's been, in part thanks to, there was a licensure law for behavior analysts that passed in Tennessee. What followed was an insurance mandate. Finally, families could get coverage through insurance for ABA care for their children with autism. And now there's just been a massive exponential growth in the number of analysts out there, which I think has helped schools. Like, we used to say, well, find a behavior analyst if you can, and school systems would say, if we could find one, we would.
Yeah.
Now it's just, every year there's more and more that we're meeting who are serving even rural communities that are far from Nashville. So and I guess other kind of differences that we'll see is leadership. There's some school systems will have these just really sharp, forward-thinking administrators at central office, and those are some ones I see achieving great things.
Yeah. And then one more question I had. So from a research perspective, where do we stand on understanding for the programs in the schools? Like, is it typically better for children that are dealing with, some position on the spectrum being educated together, or have we figured out that it's actually better for them to be in classroom with, other children that aren't facing those same challenges?
That's a phenomenal question. I mean, I believe that it's not only the legal mandate, but I think it is best for kids to be as included as they can be. I mean, I think that, we all, I think, thrive from connecting with our peer communities. However, I think that I'm seeing the pendulum swing a little bit in Tennessee. I think a few years ago, people were taking that call for inclusion and were like getting rid of special ed classrooms and saying, all right, well, we'll all be educated here then. And I think the pendulum's swinging back a bit, at least with severe behavior. We're finding some school systems are saying, well, if you have even 4 kids who, we've tried to include, but we can't do it safely. They need enough one-on-one support, or we need to build their learning readiness skills. I mean, this kid is going to need to learn how to be in a classroom before we can just plop them into a classroom.
Right.
So I'm seeing school systems, both urban and rural now, like this season, working with us to try to think, how can we make sure we have what they call a continuum of service, where no matter what your kid needs, if they're fully included, that's fantastic. If they need some support, well included, great. If they're going to be in and out of a special ed classroom for specialized academic instruction, let's make sure they get it. But there might be some kids, and the classrooms I taught over the years were those self-contained rooms where it was like all day or mostly all day students were needing support, and I never felt like we had someone in there who shouldn't have been in there. I really felt like we used our data to integrate them as soon as we could, as early as we could, but sometimes we really need intensive intervention.
That's great. It sounds like we're really making a path and a process, again, that gives that custom experience, which is, it sounds like, what is really so important there.
I think so, especially with individual children, we need individualized care.
As you think about the future for Vanderbilt and the role that Triad is playing in the community, what does the next 3 to 5 years look like in the things that you all are working on and trying to support Tennessee?
I think several cool things. I think that one of them is something we haven't talked about as much before, but I think we've always been a fan of innovation, and I think that for instance, our organization, I think, was an industry leader, like nationwide, of getting into teleconsultation relatively early. I was doing a lot of teleconsultation even back in 2015, well before COVID. What that looks like is if you have a state where you might be working with a kid with severe behavior who's 300 miles from your office, I do drive out there for those sorts of cases, but I can work a lot more cases and help a lot more kids if we're able to hop on Zoom and see, well, how are things doing this morning? Or if someone says we had a hiccup yesterday, well, I can jump on before I can get out there. People sharing videos. So I think we have a history of doing that. We're recognized as a leader nationally in that. I think some of the next areas we're moving into is looking at artificial intelligence and some of the ways that may bring to bear. I'm lucky enough, we're in year 6 of a project where we've joined with folks in Vanderbilt University's engineering department. One of their mechanical engineers, Nilanjan Sarkar, has worked with me since 2018, and we've joined together. It's this team of engineers who specialize in building sensors, artificial intelligence, and the software part, and then my team that specializes in behavior assessment and intervention. So, for instance, we're working on this project right now. It's funded by the National Science Foundation, where we are building a model where a child comes to us in our clinic that are wearing a shirt with sensors, and I'll do an assessment where I'll do the things their parent told me to do to make them happy and calm, and then I'll do things that their parents say irritate them, and then I'll do things that make them calm again, and we repeat the process a few times, and it builds a predictive model that would buzz your smartwatch when the kid is bugged and you need to back off and take it easy, or whether you need to or it's a good time to learn. So there's so many applications. I think the initial application we're looking for is if you're doing intervention or treatment with a kid with really severe behavior, there's great utility to the therapist getting a heads up, hey, they're not feeling so good.
Can you explain wearing the sensors?
Yeah.
What does that mean?
Yeah, so this is, again, this is like, it's very cutting edge. There's a lot of sensor stuff going on with machine learning. This is one where with our team, there's engineers from North Carolina State University who invented these sensors. They literally created them. And they look kind of like about the size of your key fob.
Okay.
And so you wear those. They're charged up and they're attached by Bluetooth. So those are sitting in it's like a Cat and Jack shirt from Target that's really comfy. We did some research to see what autistic individuals felt comfortable wearing. We want it to be comfortable. If we know there's some sensory needs, it needs to be wearable.
Yeah.
So it's a very comfortable shirt. We've had no one who's complained about that part. So maybe sensor here, sensor here, sensor here, sensor here, sensor here.
And just for our listeners, you're pointing at
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Yeah, you're pointing. So it was one on the forearm. There's one on the bicep or tricep. There's one in the middle of the chest, one in the middle of the back, and then the other arm as well. And then there's it looks it doesn't really look like a watch, but it's worn like a watch. So it's on a strap, and that actually collects a lot of additional things. That captures heart rate, how sweaty the person's skin is, motion and stuff like that. Additionally, too, the person wears a clip-on microphone, and we're processing audio. What we learned, I mean, there's other people who are trying to do this kind of work where we've been able to kind of lead the pack a bit, is using all those different sensors and integrating them at once is far more predictive than one thing. Like people have tried to say, well, what if someone wore a heart rate sensor? Would that predict it? Heart rate's a funky thing. It's really, really hard. We've looked at the data, not particularly predictive on its own. In fact, none of the singular channels we use are particularly predictive on their own. But when you bring 9 channels together, all of a sudden, it's not. So for instance, it's like, a kid who, moves their torso this way and puts their head down and hisses. And their parents like, that's it. That's when they're bugged.
Wow.
And so we found it isn't. Yeah, it's
comprehensive.
Yeah, it's comprehensive, and we're able to. The other thing is, so my work as a behavior analyst, some of the things I'll do in behavior assessments is where we'll literally try to recreate a problem that parents have told us about. I have assessments I do where I'll literally kind of trigger, the person getting upset. And so what that allows us to do is these models are only as strong as the number of data points you have. So if you just, like other people who are doing this sort of experiment will have someone wear sensors for 24 or 48 hours and you have to wait for them to get upset 20 times and hurt themselves. And for us, we're able to make it all happen within about an hour and 15 minutes. And we're able to do it without them hurting themselves. We're able to build the model based on the warning signs. We've had only, I think, one participant has ever had any real behavior. We've done this experiment, dozens of times, but it's all built off the warning signs. So we're proud of that. It's safe and it's quick.
That's a really spectacular, hope-giving initiative.
Yeah.
Is there anything as a wrap-up here that for those that hear it and that inspires them, maybe it's the first time that they're hearing about it, is there anything that they can do to participate or for someone that wants to support that? Any call that you can make there as we close?
I mean, I think that there's, I think the plug I would just give would be for Vanderbilt Medical Center or the Vanderbilt Kennedy Center or that Tennessee Technical Assistance Network. I think that for people who just are interested in innovative models of care, I think the Vanderbilt Medical Center, there's a division of developmental medicine within which we sit, where I think that if someone says, I am really desperate, I want my child to have, the best they can in terms of care, I think that's the place for it. I think in terms of connecting with research and being a study participant through the Vanderbilt Kennedy Center, there's a program on there called, I think, Study Finder, and parents can say, hey, my kid's this year's old, and if there's a study of this kind, we're interested. That's the way to do it. And then that Tennessee Technical Assistance Network, again, this is, it's sponsored by our Department of Education. I really hope that any parents or teachers or anybody out there listening will use that and take advantage of it. I think it's a good program.
John, your heart shines through in this interview in a really special way. And I love your story in the call that you felt really early when very, very few 17-year-old kids would volunteer for a project in the way that you did. And then to not only see it, but to be so dedicated and not diverting for a moment for your entire career has really been incredible. So it's a real treat to have you here. Tennessee's fortunate to have you at Vanderbilt, and don't go back to Southern California anytime in the near future.
No. Tennessee is home. Thank you for welcoming me not only to Tennessee, but also the podcast. This has been really a lot of fun.
Thank you, John.
Thank you.
But just finishing with John, I really came away from that impressed.
Yeah.
It's rare that you see someone that has such a servant's heart. And I could just tell in the questions and his demeanor, like he had such a nice smile. And you could just imagine that a family dealing with a diagnosis that has the potential to change the remainder of their life, that he's a guy that cares and has been in the space for so long. And I really loved seeing that.
Yeah.
It's such an asset.
And it's atypical too. I think a lot of times when, in my experience, a lot of times when I find people that really do have that driving passion, and I think you were kind of looking for that, they've got a personal experience or they've got some sort of personal tie to it. But I think it's more rare actually to find somebody that just really had a call and a gift and has just purely ended up pulled into something that he's naturally gifted to do and then has made that a life's mission. I think is an atypical and a cool thing to see.
I totally agree with that. You could see how much he has learned. He has a teachable spirit all throughout. Like, he appreciated the chance to educate in here and to be in research, like perfect spot for him.
Yeah.
Because you did point out accurately in the podcast that he has kind of made this transition from being more on the active therapy side of intervention to being on the research side.
Yeah.
And that's another unique skill set that you don't see in a lot of people, to be able to bridge between those two.
Yeah, I think that was really important to me too, because what I, saw in that, and then just thinking through some of the things we talked about, I was thinking about the dentist office example too. It's, as a parent, I think, and just going, through this thought process, it would be so easy at first to be so overwhelmed with the fear and the emotion if you find out that your child is, diagnosed with autism. I can imagine that array of complex emotions, and it would be so easy to feel kind of a loss or a despair or a hopelessness. But what I love about what John is doing with Triad is being on that research side. I mean, you can see material things that they are doing that is creating a positive outcome that can then bring so much hope and really help transition something that I think shouldn't have to be an automatic sad feeling, but instead like a hopeful possibility feeling. And I see them literally creating solutions that drive towards that, it's like, it'd be incredible to be living in a time when you're like, okay, I'm raising the next Einstein. Here goes, baby.
Yeah,
And I see that the effort that they're doing through that research side is really leading towards a path like that, and that is really hope inspiring to me.
Yeah, I thought he did give a good message of hope that not in every case, but in some, there's a element to figure out where their very special, unique gifting is. And I think just from the population size that he talked about, the specific examples of those that were spectacularly gifted in music and in math and in recollection, calculations, that presence in a small sample size, to me, not as a researcher, shows that there's something there.
Yeah.
Now, for some individuals, it may not be surfaceable.
Yeah.
We may not be able to bring that with the information and technology that we have today.
Yeah.
But I did think it provided a message of hope to say, it's in there.
Yeah.
Now, we may not find it,
Yeah.
but it's in there. And I think that's really encouraging.
And I think too, it was interesting to think about that piece, because we've always talked about this in a professional setting in the workplace, as we've managed teams and employees and built companies, that like I've always truly believed that everybody has a special gift, and they have kind of that unique thing that when they find it, it's like the stars align, and not everybody does find it, but that's for all people. But when people find it, it's so beautiful. And I think it's clear in specifically this population that, one, there's some incredible stuff that if we can learn to harness and tap into, like course trajectory altering stuff for civilization, if we can tap into these things.
Yeah.
But also it shows how little we know,
Yeah.
and still how much research is to be done, and still, how much work we have to do to figure out how to accurately tap into that for each individual in all settings, but especially in this community.
I was just sitting with the former senior pastor of Brentwood Baptist Church, Mike Glenn, a week ago, and he told me a stat that said only 13% of churches in Tennessee have any ability to accommodate kids with special needs on Sundays. 13%. I think this is an amazing call for churches to hear what John had to say, and that 1 in 35 kids is presenting with autism, which means 3%. So there's 7 million Tennesseans right now, which if you do that math, that means that there's a couple 100,000 that have autism. Now, somewhere on the spectrum, doesn't mean that it has to be severe, but somewhere there. And for churches to think about how to best serve and show care, show concern, leaning into that special education offering on Sunday to bring families a sense of normalcy just for an hour or two, I think would be a really powerful testimony that churches could, again, distinguish themselves. Because what Mike Glenn, he says this, and I love it. He says, people don't hate Christians because they're different. They hate them because they're not different enough. And I really think that this is a space that Tennessee is a leader in autism. We heard that from John. Like California 1, Tennessee 2 in treatment. Like someone in government cares. I don't know who it is. We should find that out. But someone, and it's likely a team, a group, really cares because you don't get to number 2 by accident. I think that that is an amazing place to take a cue as a church as well and say, let's lean into this special thing that's happening in Tennessee and serve our communities better.
Yeah, we're falling behind there. We're not keeping up with the times and in terms of learning from what's happening in the broader landscape. And you don't want to lose that relevance, but it definitely, I totally agree. It sounds like something that is a way where we can evolve in, what can feel kind of like a dying population or cultural relevance, but we're missing something that's actually an opportunity to do what we should do best.
Autism and a lot of special needs can be really isolating for families. For friends of mine that have that, just like John talked about at the dentist office, that it's a heartbreaking moment to think about having your child go to the dentist in a public setting and you can't properly educate them about what this is going to feel like, that there could be pain, but it doesn't mean that you're going to die. It doesn't mean that you're being tortured. And to sit there as a parent, not only have the anxiety of that experience, but you get that everywhere. You get that when you want to go out and have a dinner out, when you want to go and shop, when you want to go and do the basic things that we take for granted. How powerful would it be if our churches were able to come and say, hey, 1 in 2 churches in Tennessee has the ability to help and accommodate. I think that would help break a pattern of isolation in Tennessee where people say, I can't go out without being emotionally and physically exhausted by the time I'm done with it. So I'm only going to go out if it's essential and mission critical. And that, cultivating that engaged society too is a part of how we move forward. And the part that was tearing at my heart on that too is like being in toddler stage right now with a little one. I know that frustration when they're trying to learn to communicate, like that's when you see those emotional kind of, it's the hardest days that I've had as a parent are in that learning to communicate stage. And tantrums,
so the tantrums. And so it's like, having to face that reality and knowing that without support, we may never evolve out of that. I mean, if you don't have systems and solutions and infrastructure that wraps around you to help support you to get through that, just the mental drain and the weight of having to carry that is it just is unbearable to think about. And so I think there's a lot of opportunities still and things that we can be doing better that we're not doing well enough.
Well, I sure hope this gives John and Triad a platform of recognition for the great work that they're doing in the community and will help provide hope and provide counseling and just a feeling that progress is being made, because I felt great after this interview with John that while there's still a lot more to go, they're a long ways from where they were even 10 years ago, certainly 30 years ago when he was getting started as a camp counselor.
Yeah.